Okay, hello, it's Janice from LaRue de Fleurs. Welcome back into the studio today for part 2 of our How to Make a Patchwork Minky Blanket mini class. Today I'm going to tell you all about what we need to do to move from the fabric selection phase to actually putting the blanket together. So you may remember in the first in the series, which will be linked below or around here somewhere, we chose all of our fabrics. So now once we have these, we need to take them from large pieces of fabric and cut them all up into the 5.5 by 5.5 inch squares that we are going to use to make the patchwork blanket top. So for this part of the project, you will need a rotary cutter, an iron to make nice crisp seams. You'll of course need your sewing machine, and you can just have a regular foot on your sewing machine for this part, or a 1/4 inch foot if you have one of those. You'll need a gridded ruler, and you're cutting that, and you may need some pins. I typically don't pin when I am sewing the first blocks together. I typically only pin once I'm sewing rows together, but that's completely up to your comfort level. Of course, I've made like probably around 100 or so of these blankets up to this point. So I make other quilts and sew quite a lot as well. So I'm pretty comfortable working with the fabric. I just pin once I get to the row level because it really helps you get those nice crisp corners and alignment and have like a perfect grid, which is something that we're shooting for. Again, we are going to be going from all of our stack of selected fabric in various cuts and sizes. You may have yard or fat quarters or more than that, depending on what you're pulling from. And we are going to take it and turn it into this patchwork top. So today we will be cutting all of the pieces for our patchwork. So I am going to go ahead and pop you above and then show you how I prepare all my fabric for the blocks to piece. Okay, so for my size quilt, I am going to be doing a twin. I want it to finish at approximately 70 inches by 85 inches, which is, quilt-ish range, with my standard block size of 5.5 inches square. So that means I'll need 14 blocks across and 17 blocks down for an approximate total of 238 squares. So now you can see why quilts are expensive, because they take a long time and there's a lot of work and fabric involved in creating them. And depending on what kind of fabric you choose, it cannot be cheap. So to get started, obviously you'll need to remove any price tags that are on your fabric, because you wouldn't want to sew through them or cut through them or iron them into your fabric. And basically what I will do is make sure that my pieces are cut nice and straight across, and I will go ahead and pop this over to my iron and iron out any creases so I can get a nice straight piece of fabric, a nice straight cut. There won't be any warping, because we really wouldn't like that. That's not the point of quilting. The point of quilting when you're doing something that's like a grid design like this is to have it very straight. So you want to cut and prepare everything so it can be very straight. So you'll want to line up your selvage if your pieces are not already folded nicely or cut nicely. It depends on who you get at the fabric shop. So that is basically, you would want to take both finished edge where it came off the bolt. That's the selvage. So it has the name or manufacturer, all of the copyright information, and then on the other side it will have these little pin marks, and this is where it's tightly woven. It holds it on the bolt, and that's where they pull it through to have it printed. So that is the selvage edges. And you'll want to fold them up together. If you have a whole yard, it will be a rather large piece to work with. If you have just a fat quarter, you may find that there isn't really a selvage, so you'll have to just fold it for yourself in half, and that way you're cutting through more than one layer of fabric at a time, which definitely makes your work go a little bit quicker. So that's kind of up to you. You can do, I might stack a few together, or you can just do them one at a time. But I'm gonna go ahead and give all my pieces a nice press, make sure all of the edges are aligned for cutting, and then we will trim up all of the raw edges and make them nice and straight, and then we'll just get to making our pieces. Okay, so for the sake of the video and not making it too long, because it does take a little while to prepare 238 5.5-inch square pieces of fabric, I will just show you with a few of my fat quarters here. Now I have pressed them, I've lined up the selvage edges, and they're pretty well cut across here. I get them at a local quilt shop and she does an excellent job. But you may have more trimming to do depending on what shape they come in. So I am just going to stack them up with the selvage edges together so I know what I need to trim off, because we don't need this copyright information on our pieces of fabric. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and do that. And then I'm going to line it up with one of the lines here on my cutting mat. So I am going to just put my selvage edge slightly beyond the line here, and I am going to pull my fabric down slightly below this part of the line as well. And then that way I can cut it flush across here, nice and straight using my gridded mat, and I will cut off my selvage as well. So for this one, you're just going to take your acrylic ruler and line it up across that line, and just going to trim off this little edge. Now you may have to adjust that down a little bit more if yours weren't cut that well. And that just gives us a great, nice, crisp edge to start with. And that is a little bit of waste, but no problem. Now I am going to, if I were cutting it myself and I knew I were going to use this whole piece, I would probably go ahead and maybe just trim off the selvage right now, but that won't all fit on the camera here. And also it's perfectly fine to kind of move as you go. So however it feels most comfortable to cut is what you want to do. So I am going to slide my ruler down here on these blocks to 5.5. So my ruler has this little shaded portion that's a 1/2 inch. And then of course there's numbered lines. I have a 6.5 inch ruler, 6.5 inches by 24.5 inches, which is a pretty standard size. It came with the mat, which is really nice investment if you're looking for those things, really easy to find, great to get yourself in a kit. And I am just going to slide it down to the 5.5, and then I'm just going to cut straight across there. So just use your hand to hold it in place and use your rotary cutter and press down through those layers of fabric till you've cut yourself off a strip. Now we can go ahead and trim off our selvage edge, same way. And there are our selvages all nice and trimmed. We don't need that bit. Now I'm going to turn my ruler so that I'm going this way and I can measure appropriately across. And I am just going to put my line here at the 5, and that makes it 5.5 because my shaded area is a 1/2 inch, and I know that. So now I can go ahead and place my hand there. I want to line it up all across the grid of the mat with the grid of the ruler. And then I'm going to go ahead and use my rotary cutter and just slice that block. There you go. And now I have, since I folded 2 pieces of fat quarters in half, I have 2 of each of these fabrics ready to go, and I'm at least a fraction of the way to the 238 squares that I will need. So I need to just do that a whole bunch of other times with all my fabrics. And when I get to these pieces that are left over at the edge, you can just open them up and iron them again so that you're not getting like little wonky cuts. And then I, of course, save the end bits, and I might put them in any number of things really, but I often like to make less structured versions of these quilts too, so I'll even use the little strip that's over here at the end in another blanket mixed in with larger pieces, or you can just save them for a scrap quilt later, or they're great to make little zipper pouches and all kinds of things. So I'm going to go ahead and give this a press, and then we'll cut one more time. Okay, so again, lining up your fabric with the grid. So I'm putting my one straight edge against this one line here, and I'm lining up the other straight edge down here, and then I'm using my ruler and I'm putting it on the 5.5, and I'm lining all of that grid up too. So it's just lining things up, really simple, don't overthink it. And then using my rotary cutter to slice through those layers and make my 5.5-inch blocks. Now just do it until you get to the amount of blocks that you will need for your project. So if you want to do more of the toddler or child size, crib sized, I do 8 by 11. So 8 across by 11 down, and that is going to be 88 blocks. Cut just those first 4 fat quarters, but I thought I would pop back face to face and let you know how it is going. So we have 2, 4, 6, 8, 9 of the 5.5-inch squares from each of the 4 fat quarters, and then I have sorted them into stacks by their pattern, which will be more important later whenever we go to lay out our patterns, so that we can just easily rifle through and find what we want for each row. So go ahead and do that if you've stacked them together. And then you will be left with a few little end pieces, which these are still a great and usable size. Let's see, they are between 3.5 and 4 inches wide, and then of course they'll be 5.5 inches tall. So these will be great for additional pieces for future quilts, or you could put all of these little pieces together to make another patchwork Minky with just some smaller sizes, but of course you'll need more pieces. And then we have a little strip left off of each fat quarter, which would be the size of the fat quarter, so about 20 inches long, and then they are coming in at near 2 inches wide. So again, these are great pieces too. As a quilter, you'll learn to never throw away anything but the teeniest little piece, and even then you might hoard it for something, because that's just the way that it goes. So I'm going to continue cutting the rest of my fabrics into squares until I reach my 238 that I think I'll need to make the project, and then we will get back together and I will show you how we arrange them all out. Okay, I got all of my 5.5-inch squares cut, and I did have to add a few other fabrics into that mix just because the fat quarters that I pulled didn't really yield that much, and I wasn't able to make it to the 238, 240 blocks I think I'll need to do the project. So I did add a few additional fabrics. This black and gray dot, this cotton and steel pencil print, and this Karen Lewis textiles gray with a bunch of different white design on it. And I used the same principles that we talked about in part 1 to kind of help me decide what other fabrics would work in well and tone in nicely. And my son really likes gray, and when I was looking through the fabrics, I was really noticing there wasn't a ton of gray, so I felt like the gray background as well as the black and gray dots would really kind of pull through a little bit more of those colors.
Continue cutting until you arrive at the amount of pieces required for your particular project. Feel free to continuously reevaluate your fabrics and add in additional prints and textures as necessary. I have done that with mine, as you can see here. In the next video, we will discuss how to lay them out, so be sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss it. Thanks for joining me.